Hello and welcome to Round Robin. I'm your host, Robin McCormick with the City of Hampton. And there's a very scary term in every school kid's life these days, and it happens every spring, and it is SOL testing. And these high-stake tests were put in place to measure schools, but they also measure kids, and kids feel that pressure. But there are some things that we can do to help them be prepared and help them calm down and be ready to take this test. My guest is our Healthy Families consultant, Alvean Lyons. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you.
You know, I think that, teachers freak out, not freak out, but teachers know the importance of this. But they're grown-ups, and they understand emotionally and intellectually what it means.
It's true.
But kids, especially third graders, they're going to be tested on what they've learned since kindergarten. They've gone through this year where they get textbooks for the first time.
Right.
And they've heard the term SOL, right, which I think means something else, or maybe it means the same thing, I don't know. But, and so they get to this point in the year, and it's a stressful situation.
It really is, and it's stressful for everybody involved. So parents feel a little stressed, because now, for the first time, you feel like I'm measuring how good my kid is where school is concerned. So it feels very different than when you were just getting smiley faces and, great jobs and stickers.
Right.
It feels really different when that's first introduced in elementary school.
Or when I was kids, you do standardized testing. It was like the Iowa test. It was national things, and you got your rankings, but it had nothing to do with your grade. There was no real pressure.
Right, and it really had nothing to do with whether or not you went to the next grade, whether or not you got a verified diploma through high school. It didn't have anything to do with any of that. It was just really a barometer for you to look at where you stood relative to the nation.
Right.
But that is not the same thing when it comes to SOLs at all, nor is it the same things for our older children, AP exams, IB exams. It's not the same for any of those. So it really is, when you say high stakes testing, that is absolutely the case. It has real meaning. So how do we help our kids process what it is that they're going to do or getting ready to do, and how can we be an asset in that? So we are going to use an acronym today, one that's very easy to remember given what we're talking about. So we're going to go with the word TEST.
Good. I thought you were going to go with SOL.
No, because we're afraid of what people would have come up with.
We're staying away from that. Okay.
No, we're going to go with TEST, T-E-S-T.
All right.
So the first thing, as you pointed out before, for a lot of kids taking it the first time, they really don't understand what this means for them. The teachers do, as you said, but the kids don't. Some of the parents don't even fully understand if it's your first child going through the process.
Yes, I think that's true.
So getting to know what that's really about is very important. But once we as parents understand what it is, we need to make sure that we're talking to our kids about it. So our first T is really talk to your child about what this means. We don't want, there's some children that are that are wired a little bit tighter than other children. So it is a little scary for them, because the idea of failing or not being good enough or how they fare relative to everyone else, that is almost hardwired into some children. Then you could have one like mine who literally just doesn't care. So you have to make sure that that child understands.
To understand and not to freak out. And so, and every child's balance is going to be different.
And you want them to, you don't want the child to not realize that it is important.
Right.
So while we're trying to make sure that the child who's freaking out calms down, we also don't want the other end, the child who just doesn't think it even matters at all, and I can draw pictures using the bubbles. We need that child to understand that it's kind of important that you show what you know. So I remember when I was doing it with my children, one of the things we talked about is mommy and daddy know that you're brilliant. But we need to make sure everybody else knows that too, and this is one of those times we get a chance to show it. So this is not about whether or not you're good or bad, whether or not you're smart or not. It's really about showing people what you got out of all of this time that you've been spending in class and enjoying your teacher. And in most situations, it's a generally positive experience between the child and their teacher. So we want to make sure that those things are showing up in terms of what it is they do know and what they don't know. But we can't get to that space unless we're talking to our kids first about what this is about. What is this test trying to capture? Is it okay if I don't know everything? Absolutely. Is it okay if I don't do fantastic on it? As long as you did your best, that's okay too. But it also shows us where we may need to work and what kinds of things we may need to put a little more energy and time into. So we have to start first in that T with talking to our kids about what this means. And even when your kids get older and we've moved from SOL tests to AP exams and IB exams, recognizing that those things also affect college credits.
Yes.
What does this really mean?
Do.
This actually can mean money back in your pocket if you perform well. So take the test seriously.
Money back in your pocket, or the chance to take the classes you want to take because you've got the requirements out of the way.
All taken care of. And for some schools, it's even scholarship opportunity, depending upon how well you perform. So there are lots of different ways in which these tests can have great benefit, as long as our kids understand that they have to give their best going into this process. So then let's move to E, examine. Examine where your kids are. You can even call it evaluate. Either of those are important, but know where your kids are to the best of your ability going into these tests. Because we have a little bit of time before it happens, a small amount, it's a great time for you to utilize some of the resources that Hampton City Schools even has to take a look at how your kids are performing. I am an absolute avid supporter of Power Schools. I have it on my smartphone, so before I go to YouTube to look at the latest music video that my kids are talking about, I can touch on Power Schools and see how my son is doing in each of his classes. Do I need to reach out? It's a beautiful way to be, because you could literally tap and go straight to that teacher's email to just simply shoot out a quick email to say, hey, I noticed this, this, and this. Is there anything I need to be doing? Do I need to prepare him in this way? Those kinds of things that create that open line of communication. Teachers have a lot on their plate right now, so emailing is sometimes the most efficient way to communicate with them. And we almost all have smartphones. We can use those in ways that can really benefit our kids. So I'm a huge supporter of Power Schools. That opportunity lets me know that, hey, if he's having a tougher time in this, we may need to put a little more energy in before we take the SOL on that subject matter. And I may need to use things like Jefferson Labs, and some of the teachers will offer some great tutorials and support items that you can pick up just online that can help your kid prepare ahead of time.
You know, this is so bad, but they didn't have all the supporting stuff, you know, when my kids were younger, and I printed out the SOLs, and I would ask them random questions periodically. If there were names that were specifically mentioned, you know, who was so-and-so, do you know the contributions? Well, what about this? And especially in those elementary school years, because third grade, you're measuring kindergarten, first, second, third grade SOLs. And fifth grade, you're measuring fourth and fifth grade SOLs. So I know the teachers actually do a really good job of recapping and giving practice tests, but you know, in high school, they're kind of end of course exams. But in those earlier grades, it's bigger concepts that you develop over time, or you might have had the explorers in one year and you're tested on them a year later, and who can remember that?
And that's where the reinforcing is very important, which was the perfect segue to our S, scheduling, making sure that you know when these tests are happening, so that you have the opportunity to schedule time to do some of those things, like getting those reinforcers in. Sometimes it's just a matter of making sure the child feels comfortable with what the questions are going to look like, because some of the pressure is the not knowing. So if I know that this is what I'm going to see, then I have the opportunity to relax about it, because it's something I did at home in the comfort of my own space. So when I see it again at school, it doesn't feel like as much pressure. And then the other thing that's fantastic for those of us who have kids that are going to be taking the English or language arts SOLs, getting your kids used to that endurance, reading, those comprehension segments is very important, because we are such a generation of kids that are very stimulated, that sitting quietly, reading stories that are not about their favorite superheroes can sometimes be tough to keep that attention focused in that space. And I have a special needs child in that my child's a juvenile diabetic. So depending upon blood sugar levels, our attention span can be a little bit different. So practicing at home, learning to focus again, being quiet and just focusing on that material. What is it about? Even if he doesn't have to answer the questions on the paper, talking to me out loud, processing what it was that he just read. Did it stay with him? So practicing that can be very, very helpful for your kid, whether it's even a couple of days or a couple of weeks that you're doing it.
And some kids who process verbally, you running through that practice can help them work it out in their minds so that they can do it quietly and answer the questions.
And they then can transition when they're by themselves, exactly, so that, okay, what I just did out loud with mom over the last couple of weeks, or with dad over the last couple, or grandma, whoever it was, whoever I did that with, that's all I have to do just to myself.
And just do it in my brain
Exactly, when I'm sitting at that test. So scheduling time to prepare for that. And then as we get closer to that test, making sure that you have a good home schedule, that they're going to bed when they need to go to bed. Tired kids do not perform as well as rested kids.
No.
So don't let them stay up till 11 o'clock in the morning, 11 o'clock at night. You know they've got to be up at 7 to get to the bus stop, and kids need a great deal of sleep, and we've talked about that.
They need decent sleep, they need a decent breakfast. Absolutely. And not just that one morning. I mean, you know, you got to have that schedule.
Consistently, to the best of your ability. Whether it's breakfast at school or breakfast at home, we need to know that our kids are getting the things that they need. We even need to make sure that we're scheduling some playtime, some downtime for them.
Some physical activity to release all that stress.
To release that stress, that's exactly right. Our kids need to move and process some of that. And when you're sitting still for hours at school per day, you need to get a chance to come home and unwind from that so that you can be fresh tomorrow or the next day when you have to take another one again. And some of them have part 1s and part 2s.
Yeah.
So it really is an endurance issue sometimes, even more than an intelligence or comprehension issue. So preparing our kids for that is very helpful. So that scheduling becomes very important. And then finally, the second T is talking to the teachers. So our first one, we were talking to our kids, but our last one, we need to talk to our teachers. And that is a great way to figure out, sometimes the teachers know that there are some particular weaknesses that your child may have that they've identified as they're preparing for these tests, that they're looking. They don't want to call you and say, hey, your kid is struggling on A, B, C, and D. Sometimes they know that that's not a well-received phone call. So reaching out to the teacher to say, I'm a partner in this process. I know that you're doing the best you can there, so let me do as much as I can at home, and together we will make my child successful. That reaching out can really be a great bridge to your child's success.
And they will typically know. I mean, they do practice tests.
Yes, they do.
And then they say, okay, if X% of the kids are struggling with this concept, I'm going to go back to that concept in the classroom time. But your kid might be struggling with a concept over here that doesn't affect everybody else, that you would need to reinforce, that the teacher can't get to because it isn't the broad issue.
And that's perfectly said, because that is absolutely true. Each of our kids are different. They have different strengths and weaknesses. It could be a small element, but it may be repeated multiple times on that test. So if it's your child's weakness and we have not done anything to work on that, and they're going to see that over and over again, but it's not the broad section weakness for the class, the teachers don't have the time to be able to pause what they need for 22 kids to work on what they need for 3. So as much as they'd want to, we just don't have enough time in the day, which is why partnering as a parent is so important with your schools. So we really encourage parents to talk to your teachers. So you're talking to, first we're talking to our kids, our first team.
Okay, so we're going back through tests.
Yes, we are.
Talk to your kids.
Absolutely. Make sure they understand what this is about, that they don't take it more seriously than they need to, and not less seriously. That it really needs to be that great balance right in the middle, that they show their best selves in that experience. Then E, we're going to either examine or evaluate, whichever word you like better. But that's where we're taking a look at what our kids are doing, how they're performing in school. You can use the mechanisms and resources we mentioned, Power Schools and communicating with your teachers, but we want to make sure we know where they are so we figure out where we may have areas of weakness.
And really those first two we should be doing by now.
Those
should really be all year kinds of things, but you can catch up on them. Absolutely.
That's absolutely true. S, we want to make sure we've got a good schedule in place. So that schedule both helps us in terms of how our house is functioning, so our kids get the things that they need in terms of rest and proper food and even play, so that they're prepared for those tests and they're not stressed going into that process.
And if you need some time to do reviews, you get it in place over a few weeks, and you don't try to cram in 1 week.
In a couple of days. It's just too much. And then that final T is making sure that we are talking directly to our teachers. Find out what it is that the teacher may know specifically about what's going on with your child that will help empower your child to do their very best on those exams.
Sometimes they'll have materials they can send home that they didn't have time to go over in class with everybody, but the school system and each teacher develops an awful lot of resources.
It's true.
And so if your kid missed it the first time, here you go. Work with them on it.
And they can also point you to excellent resources that are available. There's so many of them online. And
Yes.
teachers have had
Practice
a chance to
tests.
comb through those to be able to say, this one I've found to be very, very effective working on this subject matter. So we want our kids to test well, but there are things that we as parents can do to help them test very well.
And that's the, you know, as you said, that's a lifelong skill, learning to take a test. It can be, you know, you still need it in your job, but getting through high school, if you can work with them on those high-stakes testings in the elementary years and the middle school years, there's a whole lot more that comes up in high school and beyond.
That is absolutely true. I mean, there's just so much that our kids are going to have to experience, that they will take into their young adulthood, that we will see again in different kinds of ways, but we see those things again, those skills being reused when we become adults also. So whether it's certification exams that you're doing, or whether it's qualification exams that you're, I mean, there are a series of them that we do even as adults to keep our licenses, to be able to expand our own professional development. So there is use for all of it. It is not a waste. So being able to learn those things early really can be a great support. And then I will say, healthy families can really help with the structure behind all of that. Your nurturing programs are fantastic for your younger kids. Your connecting with your teens programs are fantastic as you move into those teenage years. So that as you're trying to implement these test strategies, you have that foundation in terms of the relationship developed that makes that a very positive experience.
That sounds great. And I think it's with the teen years too, that's where you also have to get them sometimes re-involved in the outcome of their testing. You know, they begin to develop other interests and their attention may wander a little bit.
And we need to narrow that a little bit.
Get them refocused on the importance of the test.
And we want them to play hard, and we want them to work hard as well, so that there is that good balance that makes for very, very positive adults.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Definitely. Thank you.
And thank you for watching. If you have a child at home, a grandchild, these are some wonderful tips for preparing your child for that high-stakes testing that is so much a part of our educational system these days. Good luck.